Hello everyone and welcome to our live Q&A, Quantifying Quality in Food and Beverage. My name is Gareth Boyle, the Senior Marketing Executive for Fusion 5 here at Microsoft. And for this special industry-focused webinar, I'm joined by presenters, F&O Director for Fusion 5, Craig Westcott, Solution Consulting Director for Aptian, Jack Payne, and for our Q&A panel discussion, we'll be joined by Principal Consultant for Fusion 5, Tom Veach, Manufacturing Industry Director for Fusion 5, Paul Hutchings, and Senior BC Consultant for Fusion 5, Arnold van der Zwag. Before I hand over to Craig, just a couple of quick bits of housekeeping there. After the presentation, we'll have a short Q&A session with the people I've just introduced. If at all during the presentation you have a question, you can feel free to submit it via the top right-hand corner of your Teams application or browser, and we'll address it at the end for you there. We'll also be sharing a copy of today's recording with our attendees and those who couldn't make it after the session. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to our first presenter, Craig Westcott. Craig.
Hi there, thanks Gareth. Morning everyone, welcome from the almost out of lockdown Melbourne. So today we're talking to you, well actually we're going to really get Jack to do a lot of the heavy lifting, but we're talking about the quality, quantifying the quality of food and beverage. Just before we get into it, I'll touch on who we are. A lot of you guys will know, but it was just a quick intro to Fusion 5. So we're an Australia, New Zealand based organisation, pretty much. We've got 520 plus employees now across Australia and New Zealand. And we started as a business applications company really, and that's been our core focus, but we cover also innovation, insights, managed services. And we're across Australia and New Zealand, 900 plus customers roughly. And we've been, in the technology game for quite a long time. Microsoft's a massive focus for our business. We've got 220 odd people, in our business now that are exclusively focused on Microsoft, in all those areas that I've mentioned. So, and obviously business applications, finance and operations, and BC, D365, CE has been a really front and center to what we do. And there's a bit of a breakdown of the people in the team, the numbers in the team, just to give you an idea of the depth and breadth. And then really this is arguably our biggest growth area for Fusion 5, so it's going to continue to grow over the years to come. And just touching a little bit more on the breadth of the Microsoft platform and where we do focus. In the middle there you can see we do ERP, CRM, and that includes Business Central and Finance and Operations. Business Central is one of our growth areas, and we're kind of covering that in a bit more detail today on this presentation. But we also do, in our managed services pillar, we also do M365, Power BI. Power Apps is, growing at 100% for Microsoft at the moment, as so that's one of their massive growth areas, and that's integral to a lot of the solutions we're talking about today, of course. So, but just moving on to where our focus is today. For the food and beverage space, we partner with Aptian. Aptian's food and beverage solution is really an ISV solution, it's built on the top of Business Central and Finance and Operations. That's very strong in the food and bev space and does a lot of specialist functionality and specialist industry processes in this area. That's the breadth over there of what it covers, so it's quite broad. And I'm actually not going to go into it in too much depth myself because I'd probably get myself in trouble. I'll leave that to the experts, but I am going to hand over at the moment. So I'm going to hand over to Jack to talk a little bit about quality for food and beverage industry. Obviously, the main drivers in the food and beverages industry is productivity, quality, efficiencies, compliance is key as well, and quality and compliance being right at the top of the list. So I'm going to hand over to Jack to talk about that, and then we'll get a couple of the team members to touch on some of the functional areas for you. So without further ado, let me hand over to Jack. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Craig. I appreciate that introduction. And so we're going to talk about quantifying quality in food and beverage, and just a little bit about Aptian, a little bit more before we jump into our topic today. So Aptian is a global company. We're close to 500 million in revenue in US dollars. 2,600 employees, 1,000 plus food and beverage customers throughout the world. We are global. Our focus is mission critical industry-specific solutions, with food and beverage being one of our key focus targets that we have with this. So a lot of employees, a lot of customers in this industry, and we try to have solutions that go across the full supply chain, from growers all the way through distribution, as well as for companies of all sizes, whether it's a F&O size company or whether it's a Business Central size company. Here's we call our logo slide, our billboard slide. A lot of different customers. Some of these names you may recognize. Some of these names may be new to you, but just many, many customers in food and beverage, across the industry, both locally as well as globally with that. So enough about Appian. Let's talk about our agenda today. We're going to talk about, first of all, our supply chain with food and beverage. And supply chain is a term that's becoming a household term the last 18 months. I think if you were not in the industry, you probably didn't know what supply chain or were not familiar with the terms. We're going to talk about food safety and food quality. What is that in food and beverage? And then we'll be looking at industry trends, both consumer and regulatory trends, and talking about digital transformation and how digital transformation can benefit food and beverage companies across many areas, but primarily we'll be talking about that in terms of food safety and quality. And then that will take us into the question and answer session for today. So let's get started. And just to give you a little bit of background, I've been working in ERP since before it was ERP, 35 plus years. The last 25 years, I've really focused in the process manufacturing, with most of that focus being in food and beverage. And then the last few years has been primarily food and beverage focused with this. So throughout this process, I thought a lot about the food and beverage supply chain. And I thought about, well, what is the source of our food? And as I go, thinking about every example I can think of, typically that is a farm. I can come up with a couple of examples that are not exactly the farm, but everything starts with a harvesting process. In the farm, we're going to be growing, there may be packers. From the farm, it may go directly to distribution. If we're produce, could go directly to some restaurants. But for today's purpose, we're going to talk about output from the farm going to the factory. Those couple of examples that may not be a typical farm would be wild catch seafood. So it's a harvest process that we have to have for that. So we're not really growing it ourselves on a farm. We're harvesting it. And then minerals, salt being, the most common mineral. We don't grow salt, but we actually have to mine or harvest salt and other minerals to use within our process. So I keep always going back to the term, everything starts at the farm and then goes through the supply chain. So if we look at the next step, we'll be going into a factory for processing or manufacturing. It may go through multiple levels of factories, because there may be factories that produce food or food ingredients that go to other factories that are producing food. So it may go through a couple levels or several levels, and then into the distribution process. Well, that distribution is going to food service, which we've all seen that has gone down in the last 18 months, more going into the retailers, and also a market that's been increasing tremendously is in the e-commerce, direct to consumer market, and then to the fork or consumer. And again, that has changed. In North America prior to the pandemic, about 2/3 of the food volume was consumed at home, about 1/3 was consumed away from the home. Most people think of restaurants, but lots of institutions, lots of travel, lots of entertainment, schools, so lots of other areas other than restaurants. It was, like I say, 2/3, 1/3. I haven't heard specifics. It's not back to that. I think it's going to be a while before it is back to that. But we'll be talking some more about our food and beverage supply chain and the main steps within that supply chain. But let's talk about food safety and food quality. A lot of times these terms are used interchangeably with this, but they're really two separate terms. But the key is that our customers and our consumers are demanding both food safety and food quality. So let's break this down and talk about, well, what's the difference? Well, food safety is the science-based prevention of food contamination. And the key or the focus on that is the prevention of contamination to the food. And we've seen several regulations, voluntary guidance, starting back in the 80s and 90s with HACCP. And then in 2000, we got into the Global Food Safety Initiative certifications through that. The Food Standards Code in New Zealand, Australia, I think that was 2003. And then the US, the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA, in 2011, where we were just kind of catching up to you with regulations and standards with that. In the beginning, I'm going to say it was more voluntary with the Global Food Safety Initiative. And voluntary being if you wanted to sell to the customers that required that, it was voluntary if you wanted to comply or not, but if you didn't comply, you probably didn't sell to them. But then when the Food Standards Code came out and the FSMA regulations came out, it was no longer voluntary, it was something that was required. But all of these require traceability and recall to be able to contain any contamination to the food. But again, the focus is preventing this. I've known a number of companies that have gone through, hundreds and hundreds of food companies. I've lost count. And I've seen some that have had very, very good food safety. But then when it comes to food quality, which is more subjective, to me, this was somewhat questionable because it was my personal preference in terms of their quality. Maybe it was not a texture or a taste that was appealing to me, but it might have been appealing to my neighbor or someone else with this. So, there are some objective measures, but subject as well as subjective. And I've worked with several companies where they had their own company stores that they were making food for, and they had very, very high food quality. They were, considered very well across the industry. But from a food safety, they did not have GSI certification because it wasn't required for them. But I had no problem of my own as being involved with these companies, knowing that they had outstanding food safety to go along with their quality. But then when in North America the FSMA regulations came out, they were also required to comply with these. So two different things, we interchange them a lot. I think the closer we get to the consumer is thinking they're the same thing, but they're really two different things with this. We're probably talking more about food safety today, but also quality is important. And when we talk about food quality, what is this a photo of or a picture of? Is this of food safety or this is food quality? So this may be all very healthy, very nutritious produce to eat, but depending upon what terms you may call this, if you're being politically correct, it's typically called imperfect produce. If you're not being politically correct, I've heard this referred to as ugly food or ugly produce with this. Nutritional value is probably all the same, but if I was to go to the store to buy any of this to bring home, I would probably not select this unless it was the only thing that was remaining in the bin for me to select with this. Because this produce is considered imperfect, and maybe because the appearance is not as good, there's a lot of this produce that's left in the field or left unharvested. Or let's say if it gets to the retail stores, many times it doesn't end up going home with the consumer. Just like I would probably make a choice not to take this unless I knew it was at a much reduced price from this. Again, just an example of what's the difference of safety versus quality. Let's talk about some of the trends in food and beverage and the outlook for what we see. In late 2020, we commissioned Reuters to do a survey of over 300 C-level executives in the food and beverage industry, across all segments and across all sizes of companies. And we had quite a number of things that we learned from this. I want to share some of these with you. We have just recently completed a second study. And in that second study, we did have the results that did support this. And I'll be sharing some of those results in future webcasts, but did support what we saw in 2021. And so one of the topics that we wanted to learn about and find out about is, what did the food executives think is going to impact the food industry the most in the next 5 years with this? And it wasn't too surprising from this. the pandemic had not changed this too much. The top 3 items that we had response on was, number 1 was changing consumer demands. Number 2 was sustainability. And these were so close. Personally, I think those are a tie for number 1. They're really close together, because a lot of times consumer demands are demanding sustainability as well as demanding certain types of foods or certain types of packaging of food. Number 3, traceability demands. So traceability is something that we've been talking about for years. Prior to the Food Safety Initiative in 2000, this was something that was required to be able to trace your finished product to your customers if you had a recall, to help you contain that, or if you could not trace that, you had to recall everything that was in the marketplace. And this is when I started seeing, I'm going to say, forward-looking companies that understood the importance and the benefits of traceability, to be able not to only contain the recall, but to be able to protect the brand, to protect the company, and then to tie everything back together with traceability to their ingredients. So forward-looking companies have been looking at that. So over 25 years, I've continued to see traceability demands as one of those top topics that people are looking for. I want to just take a mention on number 4, emerging technology. So when I think about this, I'll dig deeper into this. I think this is digital transformation. How can we use technology to be able to address what's going to impact the food industry in the next 5 years the most? And then regulatory changes. It goes along with traceability demands. Continuing changes, getting stronger with the traceability demands and food safety demands. Likewise, to the question of what's going to impact the food industry the most, we asked these executives, what were their biggest threats that they felt like they'd be facing in the next 5 years? And it wasn't too surprising after reviewing the first topic. So sustainability and consumer technology and consumer trends are the number 2 from a trend. That was also their biggest concerns of how they're going to address sustainability, environmental impact, how are they going to address consumer trends and habits. And what's interesting is, tied for number 2 and 3 was changes in consumer trends and habits and lagging behind in digital transformation. And we've all seen companies where they've been in food and beverage, or they've been in other industries that did not stay up with the time, so to speak, and they lagged behind and eventually went out of business just because they did not keep up with this. And this is a concern that as consumers are having new trends and habits, as a food and beverage company, I need to stay ahead of those, or stay up with those, but stay ahead of those if I can. Number 4 is an honorable mention. The pandemic continue to be a threat and has had a lot of impact to the food and beverage industry over the last 18 months. And I think it's still going to have some lingering impact going forward, particularly what's happened with supply chain, what's happening with commodities and prices of commodities and so forth. So let's dig a little bit deeper into the number 1 trend of consumer demands, looking forward in 2021 and future with this. And the demands, the trends that we've studied, we learned, these happened, or these trends were going on prior to the pandemic. These were trends that we've been seeing for the last 3 or 4 years. Consumers are demanding transparency. They're looking for clean label ingredients. They're looking for ethical, responsible sourcing. So when they buy that produce, or they buy the coffee, they want to know what farm this came from. Was there ethical treatment of the workers? Was there proper ingredient sourcing in what they're having? And then also along with that is sustainability. Are we reducing the waste throughout the supply chain? Worldwide, there's about 33%, or a third of the food is wasted, throughout the supply chain, from the farm all the way to the consumer. But also, it's more than just recycle packaging or reduce packaging. It's reducing, eliminating waste, and being able to use those imperfect produce that we saw earlier. Consumers are also demanding health and wellness. When I was growing up, we talked about nutrition and we talked about the importance of proper nutrition, but there was not the focus that there is today on health and wellness in terms of enhanced nutritional value, but also looking for healthy foods that taste good. And that was, as I was growing up, it was two things. It was either food that tasted good or food that was healthy. As a child, I don't remember too many foods that were healthy that tasted good. But now that, we and younger people have grown up, we are demanding that, along with an increase in plant-based foods. So most of these deal with food safety and deal with food quality. Now, as we come through the pandemic, there have been additional trends and demands from the consumers. Again, on the health and wellness side of it, eating foods and drinking beverages for immune health, not just for nutritional value, but also for your immunity. It's been very important to us. And then consuming on demand. So as there's been the closing of restaurants and other establishments, as a consumer, we like those restaurant branded products. I know in going through the retail store myself, I would see some retail branded products and yes, I'm going to buy this. I want to take it home. I want to have that experience of eating at that restaurant chain, the particular restaurant that I like, because now I can do that at home. Also, we got used to convenient meal solutions. Myself, I was in that category that ate more than a third of my food away from the home. Someone else was preparing that for me, and I had to quickly learn how to prepare more than one or two different dishes to get a balanced diet with that. So I was also looking for convenient meal solutions. But consumers are also looking for what's called product mashups, innovations, new sensory experiences, things like bacon flavored ice cream, things that some people think sound yummy, other people's maybe not so yummy, but also comfort foods, during this time is we remember a lot of times our youth, and we remember maybe some of the comfort foods from what we would consider happier times with that. So these are the demands that consumers have added to in the last 18 months to what they're asking for in their food and beverage choices. So what's going to happen also in terms of regulation and direction and vision with this? And in the middle of 2020, the FDA in the United States came out with their blueprint for the new era of smarter food safety. And there are 4 key sections of this particular blueprint with this. I'm going to touch a little bit on the first section and the last section. The first being tech-enabled traceability, and the last being a food safety culture primarily for consumers and education among those consumers. Now, when the FSMA regulations or the act was signed and as the regulations were being developed, I attended a food safety conference shortly after that. And one of the guest speakers at this food safety conference was the consulting organization that was working with the FDA in terms of defining those regulations. And I was very much in favor of traceability. I've been promoting traceability for many years at that time. And one of the things that I actually talked to them out in a networking session was the end-to-end traceability. What is the vision for this? That is, first of all, starts at home, that every food company has to be able to do traceability from supplier to their customer. But when do we tie all this together so that we have now full traceability throughout the food chain with this? And so this was now stated as an ultimate goal from the FDA in US. And they said with this, there are three areas. One is foundational concepts or standardization of critical tracking elements and key data elements. So if this is not standardized, there's no way we can connect all the dots, so to speak, within the supply chain to be able to do this. So they're looking for companies to start this, but also encouraging new technologies and encouraging digital transformation. In the past, the FDA did not promote how you had to do traceability or what method, whether it was paper-based or whether it was an Excel spreadsheet, whether it was in a bolt-on system or part of your business ERP system. It was not so much for them to say how you did it, but more that you could do it. So now they are encouraging this as their vision for the smarter food safety. There also are talking about consumers being more educated and being more aware and having a food safety culture. And I think some of this is already happening. So that as a consumer, if I go to the store, I'll scan a bag of lettuce. I want to know, the source of that. Have there been any outbreaks on that particular farm or through that particular distribution network? How's the sustainability on the farm? How are the workers being treated with that? I want to get text message alerts. So if I'm tracking what food I'm buying, and I don't want to wait to find out that maybe the food I have in my pantry or my refrigerator has been recalled. I'd like to get text alerts if it has been recalled before this. Maybe I've bought this food and I've scanned it through my smartphone and knows what the best before date is. Doesn't necessarily mean the food's not safe to eat. It may just not be its terms in taste or smell, but I might want to know about this so I can use the food when it's at its best taste and smell. But also giving consumers greater confidence in food safety, to be able to predict contaminated food or predict weather events that might cause food safety. Now, along with this is the Food Standards Code within Australia and New Zealand that you're probably familiar with. And, this is just a little snippet in terms of what does it mean for me. And a couple of key things to point out is basically it's saying traceability. If you manufacture food, you need to be able to have full traceability of the food and a recall program. And you also need to be able to tie all the ingredients all the way to the finished goods with this. So these are regulations that are really global regulations. Now there are government regulations in various countries that are supporting this, but they're all leading into our global food supply chain in terms of food safety with this. And notice the regulations from either the Food Standards Code or for the Food Safety Modernization Act really don't say anything about food quality. It's about safety of the food and preventing contamination and having the ability to react and recall food with that. So what about digital transformation? And is this something that can provide benefits for food safety as well as for food quality? And the short answer is yes, it can. So again, through this survey that we did, the top three came back, and this was one of those where it said, you can pick more than one. So when you add the numbers up, you'll see there's more than 100% with this. But when I start analyzing the information with this, I'll throw out number 2 and 3, data capture and reporting analytics. To me, these are components of digital transformation. So just because you're using data capture to capture, or you've got better reporting analytics, it doesn't really improve the business. What you do with this is what improves the business. So what areas does it improve the business? Supply chain, and it might be because that was top of mind when this particular survey was done, but supply chain came in at a very, very easy number 1, but tied for number 2 when I throw out the components of digital transformation is improvements to production, improvements to quality control, and food safety. So people have seen a lot of benefits to their food safety and quality through digital transformation. But if you look at everything else, and down below this also about removing paper-based processes, but if we ignore this one as well, we can see that basically every area of a company does benefit from digital transformation with this. So this is something that companies need to consider and companies need to look at. Now, in the previous slide where I talked about, what are the 4 key nodes within the food and beverage supply chain all the way from farm to fork, I realized that was a very simplistic view, but a more realistic view of that is it is very complex. It does start with growers, starts with agribusiness. Within this, there are wholesalers and suppliers to this. There's feed, there's fertilization, other things that go into this. Then the next step is the food processing. We may have food ingredient companies that are providing to other food companies, and then into all the different types of distribution channels that we get into, and then in types of all the places that consumers would obtain their food. and then to the consumer themselves with that. So lots of challenges in managing the supply chain. And I think, we've all seen and we've all experienced, and we're seeing what's happening when the supply chain changes. And I think in the past, 2 years ago, we had the supply chain built very efficiently, where it could move product very fast all the way from the growers to the consumers, but it was a very rigid supply chain. It was not flexible. When the demand changed, when the pandemic started, the supply chain could not easily change with this. A lot of companies that were growing foods for different processors that went into food service, they had a food that was unharvested. If they were maybe in the dairy process, milk that maybe went down the drain because they had no consumers for it, they had to reinvent themselves to be able to sell into the retail channel for people making those products. A lot of those had to change as well. If they were geared up for food processing, they weren't able to make packages, consumer packaged goods with this. So a lot of changes to this very, very rigid supply chain. I think the lesson we've learned is we need to be efficient, but we need to be agile, and we need to be able to move very fast with this. So looking at this more complex supply chain, what is the typical state of food safety? And, when I go out and other colleagues go out and talk to companies about food safety, a lot of times we're talking to companies that are looking for a solution. But many times when I get them to explain or to draw, what are you doing today? What's your process? It kind of looks like spaghetti here. They may have an ERP system. They may not have an ERP system. They may have all these other things that they've tried to bolt on, probably lots of Excel spreadsheets, probably lots of file cabinets, a lot of siloed systems, and it just gives everybody a headache. And that's why they're looking to improve or looking to change that. And a lot of paper-based record keeping, a lot of logs, a lot of journals of what's going on, a lot of the critical control point checks with HACCP. A lot of these are logged on a paper record rather than being logged into a formal system that can track trends if you're starting to trend out of tolerance, or also tracking if the check was not made at the time it was not made. So what does this do for trace and recall? If we have paper-based records doing this, if we had spreadsheets, and let's say we are a processor who's making frozen pizzas. There's been a lot of demand for frozen pizzas the last 18 months. There was a lot of demand before that, been into a lot of pizza manufacturing companies. And, I'm going to say there are 5, key areas of ingredients that go into this. All these different ingredients come from different sources. The dough or the crust, whatever they're starting with. They may be making their own pizza sauce. Most of them I've seen are buying the pizza sauce from another food manufacturer who's making it for them. Veggies that may be coming from a grower or a packer. It could be coming from a vegetable distributor. Their meats. A lot of their meats are, cured or processed meats, pepperoni, sausages that go on this. Where does this come from? And then dairy products with cheese from this. So if you're I'm going to say the manufacturer who's doing this, you probably trace this back maybe to 5 or 10 suppliers. So yeah, you could probably do it, but you're not going to be as efficient. You're going to have the problem of people writing down information that you can't read or is not transcribed properly. So yes, this needs to be improved. But when we start looking at that vision of what happens when we start trying to connect all the dots, and let's say that we've taken this frozen pizza and we've now sold this out to our customer who's a distributor, whether that's going into food service or whether it's going into the retail, and we need to recall that, or we need to trace that back to all of the suppliers within the food and beverage supply chain. And just based upon my knowledge and experience, I tried to do a little exercise, say, well, how many people would be touching this throughout the process? So from a dough or crust supplier, when we got the flour mill, goes back to the wheat farm. We probably got baker's yeast that goes all the way back to the sugar plantation that made the sugar that created the yeast. There's typically salt, a little bit of salt in the dough, so we got to go back to the salt mine. What about the pizza sauce? Whether we're making it or someone else is making it, pizza sauce typically starts with tomato paste that comes from the farm. There's typically spices like garlic. There may be vinegar in it, like balsamic vinegar that comes from the vineyard. This may come If we're in North America, it may be coming from a vineyard outside North America with this. Produce is probably coming from, different places. A lot of it may be coming from a produce distributor. If we have olives on this, it may be coming from a importer who's getting it from an exporter, who's getting it from a grower. And then pepperoni, has its own challenges with this. Is it an all beef pepperoni? Is it all pork? Is it a combination of beef and pork? What ranch did the beef come from? What pig farm did the pork come from? We got the salt coming out of the salt mine. We got the other spices, coming out of spice factories. And then when we get to the cheese, we have the whole dairy thing of going all the way back to the dairy farm where the cattle at and all the enzymes to make the cheese and the salt. So I would say there probably were 50 steps with this. And now we start talking about tying all these together. This is a challenge. It is something that everybody's going to be willing to adhere to standards, provide information on a timely basis. But to be able to do that is you've got to have your own systems in place to be able to track this accurately and timely and then provide to that. So one of the things I typically promote is, trace and recall must be part of your business system, but it must be part of your ERP system. It's not paper-based, it's not spreadsheets, it's not bolt-on. So if I was to, take and represent this pizza factory that we've been looking at, just the factory itself, and, just a pizza with just a couple ingredients on it, it may look some kind of traceability if I was to draw it out like this, so that all the way on the left and the blue trucks, those are our suppliers bringing in the different ingredients, going through all the processes and inventory to produce a finished product, which may go out to multiple warehouses and shipped out to multiple countries with this. So in doing this, we need an ERP system, but we need an ERP system that is designed for food and beverage and can track these, this information that we need, as well as provide full quality, food safety, and full traceability and recall. So typically from an ERP system, your business processes are going from left to right, such as your order to cash, your procure to pay. But then you need an ERP system that basically puts your food safety and your traceability goes across all these business processes so that we have food safety before we purchase our goods, all the way to food safety to after we ship our finished products to our customers with this. And, this starts with our digital transformation backbone. And the beginning part of that is our business system that would capture this. But also we need real-time paperless data collection. One of the most common places for starting is barcoding of transactions so that those transactions are real-time, so that there is not transposition errors and writing wrong numbers down, that whoever's writing it down, somebody's entering it, but also going past that with various sensors and various connectivity to MES systems to track other quality information and quality data with this. But now that we've got this wealth of data, it makes it very hard to continue to report and analyze on it with this. So this is where we need business analytics or a trending system. So if we're taking quality data and over time, maybe this quality data we have not trended out of bounds yet, but maybe we're starting to trend out of bounds. So this is where we need a business intelligence system that's really predictive analytics that can actually recognize us for us, can notify us about it and alert us so that we can get control of the process back before we trend out of bounds with this. Now I've included some examples that kind of go along with this. So, starting at the food safety, the first place is supplier certification. Being able to have a certification program for your suppliers, having the proper certification records, what is the follow-up for that, but also enforcing that you can only buy certain products from certified suppliers. And just because you can buy product A from a certified supplier, you can't buy product B. Certifying both the product and the supplier, again with recertification dates. And then as you receive the goods in from that supplier, inbound quality checks. So it's the logistics as well as the supplier coming in. What is the cleanliness, so the temperature of the check coming in, the check weights that are all coming in with this, and making sure they're within our targets that we're looking for. but also receiving inspection about the goods that come in and tracking this. It may be that we're requiring certificate analysis from our suppliers, but also we're maybe doing our own quality tests as well and tracking that. So we're making sure that the ingredients and packaging that we're bringing in does have good food safety along with that, so we can then use that within our production process and our recipes and our batch tickets, our batch cards, to produce safe foods. So we need a system that can support the batches. Typically a bill of material supports a quantity of 1. And no matter what food factory I've been in, they never make a quantity of 1. It's always a batch of X number or X pounds or whatever. So with pizza, you don't make just one frozen pizza. You make a minimum batch size of frozen pizza. That may be 100 cases of that frozen pizza. But we also need quality monitoring of what's happening with that, and that quality monitoring, looking at our in-process testing within production, and also looking at our finished product testing and our packaging tests, because the food may be safe food going in, but if the packaging does not ensure the prevention of contamination after it's been produced, we need to ensure that meets that. We also need to ensure we have the proper labels with it, and all the allergens are properly listed with that. And then when we ship to our customers, food quality audits to make sure, again, the outbound logistics and also the product that we are shipping is the right product meeting the right shelf life for that customer. So this kind of takes us, quickly from supplier to customer, full traceability backwards and forwards. And now that we have this information, we may get an inquiry from a customer. They must be something that could be something that comes through Outlook. And using the power of the Microsoft platform, this is where from Outlook that can connect into, in this example, Business Central, and actually launch a traceability record, so we can go in and see what our traceability looks like from this. And then once we've done this, from this, we can then have all the information that we may need to do to either assure our customer there's not a problem with this, or we may need to notify other customers about the recall and notification. But again, using the power of the Microsoft platform, the ability to assign tasks through teams and have teams, track the recall, track all the tasks with that. There's the internal as well as the external. The external, I think, is what most people think about in terms of customer notification and, destruction, destroying of food or the return of the food. But there's also a lot of internal activity to contain that. And there may be other things that need to be changed or whatever with that. So Teams is a good tool and a good use to be able to tie all this together from the customer inquiry coming through Outlook all the way into Teams with this. And having, the proper tools to trace back to the suppliers, tracing forward to customers, the proper tools for creating recall and notification efforts with this. And then again, using our business analytics to be able to look at trending and, determine, are we having problems that are maybe occurring based upon a particular ingredient coming from a supplier, or maybe it's a particular shift, or maybe it's a particular machine. What is the cause for this, and are we getting better, or are we not getting better with this? So this is, taking that third element of that digital transformation process of the business intelligence. The first part of it is give us the ability to prevent contamination and provide food safety and be able to track this and recall, but also how do we improve and get better? It is through the business intelligence and predictive analytics to get there. I've covered quite a lot, what I consider a few short minutes here. I could go on and on all day long on this, but I want to thank you for your attention today and for your participation. If you have any questions, and we're going to go into question and answer anymore, but if you need any more information, Fusion 5 locally, or you can also connect with me through info@aptian.com. I also have an email address. It's actually one of my business partners I work with. Her name is Jill. And so it makes it easy to remember. Jack and Jill at Appian.com is also another way that you can get in touch with me. So again, thank you for your attention. And so Garth, let me turn it back to you and turn it over to our question and answer.
Thanks for that, Jack. That was really interesting. I never thought of how many touch points are going into my Saturday night pizzas, but I will be very conscious of that moving forward. So I've got a couple of questions. I might start off with this big one for you, Jack. So what about trace and recall for non-material related data, such as machines or personnel? Is it something that should be done or is being done or is really important for trace and recall?
So, this is something I'm a big proponent of. And I think, maybe this is in the last 18 months, we've all had our eyes open to this. But, if I look at most of the food safety standards, they're about prevention of contamination, prevention of problems, and being able to trace the food. But most of the traceability, we're focusing on connecting all the ingredients and the packaging that touches the food to the finished product. But there could be equipment or personnel that's involved in this. So let's say that we did not have proper sanitation on a particular mixer 2 days ago. How do we know what products went across that mixer in those last 2 days? And how do we recall those very easily? A lot of traceability systems don't do that. That's where we have to go back to paper-based systems to do that. So I think that's very important. The other more obvious one, and I used to use the term Typhoid Mary with this, but maybe, and I haven't heard this name, and maybe I'm coining it now, maybe it's Pandemic Paul or something. So, and we all know that you could be contagious with the COVID virus, 48, up 24 to 48 hours before you have symptoms. So there was probably in a lot of companies, a lot of industries, and probably in food, there might have been people that were working on the lines, preparing food, packaging food, doing whatever, that may the next day had symptoms. And so we need to go back and find out what products and lots that they were working on. So I think this is something that is very much needed. I think that forward-thinking companies today are already thinking about this, but this is something that I hope to see in the future in regulations that come out, that the processes, the equipment, the people is just as important as the ingredients in terms of traceability.
Thanks, Steve, for that, Jack. What are the benefits of moving to cloud for digital transformation, and how long is that journey?
Well, there are several parts to that. So let's first of all talk about the digital transformation journey. And it is a journey. It is not a sprint. It's more of a marathon. And typically 2 to 3 years is considered an average process for that digital transformation journey. With that, it starts with basically doing a analysis or inventory as where are you? Do you have an ERP system? Do you have an ERP system that's modern enough to support some of the technologies that we need to do with this? Or do you need to implement an ERP system for this? And then do you need to consider going to the cloud for this? And we've seen a lot of benefits with this. And this was one of the results of this most recent study that we've done in the last 30 days, where we looked at the key performance indicators of companies that were on-premise based versus companies that were cloud-based. And there's a very significant difference, very higher metrics of those that were cloud-based. And the reason for that is kind of twofold. One is they were able to stay on modern platforms that could support, what they want to do from a digital transformation, but also it let the business focus on what they do best, on run the business, and not having to focus on the underlying infrastructure from a technology standpoint. So I think that it is very important. Also, the other benefit in the world that we live in today is the cyber threats. And unfortunately, I've talked to too many companies that have been victims of cyber threats, and companies that have not been able to produce or ship to customers for 1 or 2 weeks or longer because of a cyber attack that they had until they could get back in business, as well as they may or may not have paid the ransomware with that. So that whole business continuity, having a proper partner from a cloud deployment standpoint can also help with that business continuity as well.
Thanks, Jack. And I've just got one here from Michael. So what is needed to use barcode scanning?
So barcode scanning, the two main components of it is a barcode and a scanner. So, first of all, we need the technology, and, Wi-Fi is pretty prevalent these days. There are some places I've been into where, Wi-Fi is hard to achieve. If we start talking more from the farming type community, that may be more difficult, where in some areas Wi-Fi or cellular, may not be present or prevalent with that. But let's say we first need to have that Wi-Fi, that connectivity to it. We need to have the proper scanning devices. Today, those are typically going to be Android-based devices that you would connect, through the cloud, typically to your business system with that. And then we need to have a common method of barcode identification of products coming in. It may be that you have a lot of your suppliers that have barcodes on their products that come in, but they may be of the benefit to your suppliers of how they have produced those products. But if you were to try to say, okay, I've got 20 different suppliers with 20 different barcodes that come in, that would be very difficult. So either it needs to be that your suppliers all are using the same standards, such as the GS1 standard for barcoding, or typically what happens is, as you receive each product, is you need to use your own internal barcode format to label each product that comes in. Again, depending upon what industry it is, whether it is, let's say, a pallet of goods, everything's on that pallet's the same, and you can put one barcode to denote how much you have on that pallet or skid, or whether maybe you're bringing in meat or dairy products that has a catch weight, that we need to have a barcode label on each individual case with that. Now, those industries, those typically tend to be more toward companies that support suppliers that would support GS1 standards. So there has to be a common method of barcoding, and we have to train the people instead of writing information down, and then maybe that getting entered into the system later that day, or maybe the next day by someone in the office, is to actually scan at the time of receiving. And on time of receipt, it may be where you have to key into the scanner, here's what I'm receiving, and it actually generates the barcode for you that you place on that. I hope that answered the question there.
That's perfect. So I think that's it for questions. So I think we can wrap up a couple of minutes early, which I'm sure no one will complain about. But I just want to thank you, Jack, and the team at Aptian for the hard work that you've put into this presentation. And I know you have, and it's been really great to get you guys on board as a partner with Fusion 5. And I think you've brought on a wealth of information in the BC and space, especially in manufacturing as well. I will be sending out a recording and a copy of Q&A questions to our attendees and those who couldn't make it. Now, if you do have any immediate burning questions, please feel free to reach out to Jack or any of the Fusion 5 team you have seen today. Other than that, have a great rest of your day, and thank you very much for joining us as well. Take care, everyone.